Imagine a $150 million blockbuster just tearing itself apart from the inside. Like, we are talking about a movie where the leading man is furiously rewriting the script every single day on set.
Oh, yeah. Just absolute chaos behind the scene.
Right, and you have a director orchestrating these massive citywide explosions while hobbling around on a broken foot. Plus, a behind-the-scenes legal loophole that permanently alters cinematic history.
It really is a wild story.
It is. So I want you to think back to the summer of 2008. If you look at pop culture, that summer was just an absolute seismic event.
Oh, absolutely.
Everyone remembers Iron Man hitting theaters and launching this massive, unprecedented superhero universe.
Yeah.
But right on its heels, like just a few weeks later, came a movie that is almost always treated like the awkward middle child of that universe, The Incredible Hulk.
It genuinely is the forgotten sibling, which is, kind of ironic considering it was supposed to be the foundational pillar for an entire mega franchise. And this isn't just a story about a superhero movie. If you really look closely at the source material we have for today's deep dive, it becomes this fascinating case study. It is the exact moment where corporate rights, auteur ambitions, and massive technological leaps all just violently collided.
And that is exactly our mission for today.
Yeah.
So, welcome in. We have a massive stack of sources today detailing the 2008 film's creation. And we are going to explore the intense, behind-the-scenes turbulence of The Incredible Hulk.
There's a lot to get through.
There really is. We're going to unpack the massive creative clashes, figure out how a movie about a giant monster destroying a city actually became a groundbreaking environmental initiative, and finally untangle this incredibly complicated legal web that forever dictated the trajectory of one of pop culture's biggest characters.
Well, before we get into the chaos of the physical production and how the movie ultimately fell apart in the editing room, we really have to look at how it came together on the page.
Right, the script.
Yeah, because the studio, Marvel, they were in a very precarious position at the time. They were desperately trying to avoid the mistakes of their own recent past.
You were talking about Ang Lee's Hulk from 2003.
Exactly.
Because the reception to that movie was, well, let's just say mixed, to put it politely. I mean, a lot of people thought it was too slow, too weird, and edited too much like a literal comic book panel come to life.
Yeah, it was very stylized.
So Marvel gets the production rights back, and they want a totally fresh start. But the sources point out they didn't want to do another standard, 40-minute origin story where a guy gets powers and slowly learns how to use them.
Right. Producer Gail Ann Hurd actually coined a specific term for their approach. She called it a requel.
A requel.
Yeah, it's a portmanteau of reboot and sequel. They wanted to distance themselves from the 2003 film to give this new version its own identity, but they didn't want to start from scratch.
That makes sense, I guess.
So they decided to lean heavily into the fugitive, lonely man vibe of the classic 1978 to 1982 TV series. The one starring Bill Bixby.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second, because a requel sounds incredibly risky.
Oh, it is.
It feels a bit like buying a notoriously haunted house, keeping the basement and the foundation, but completely ripping out the walls, changing the floor plan, slapping on a new coat of paint, and trying to convince the neighborhood it's a brand new, ghost-free construction. Like, how do you actually execute that narratively?
It's tough.
Our audience is just going to be confused about what they're supposed to remember and what they're supposed to forget.
It is a massive narrative gamble, you're right. To pull off that kind of distraction, you need an actor with immense gravity.
Right.
Someone who commands the screen so completely that the audience just buys into the new reality immediately, and that is exactly why they brought in Edward Norton to play Bruce Banner.
But Norton is famously particular about his projects.
Very. He only agreed to take the role if he could rewrite the script. Norton was a massive fan of the character, particularly that Bill Bixby television era, but he wanted to elevate the material far beyond just a standard popcorn action flick.
Yeah, the notes here mention he was drawn to the Greek myth of Prometheus.
Yes. Prometheus is the mortal who steals fire from the gods and is eternally punished for it by having his liver eaten by an eagle every single day.
Wow, dark.
Right. And Norton viewed Bruce Banner through that exact lens. Gamma radiation wasn't this cool superpower. It was the stolen fire. And the Hulk was the daily, agonizing punishment.
So he didn't just want a monster movie.
Not at all. He wanted a darker, mythic tragedy. He definitely wasn't there to play a guy who turns green and punches a tank.
And he was intensely committed to that vision. Like the original writer, Zach Penn, had already done several drafts, but once Norton signed on, He was rewriting scenes every single day on set.
Every single day.
He was essentially trying to craft this deep indie-style character study right in the middle of a massive studio tentpole. But, and this is wild, after all that daily rewriting and agonizing over the dialogue, the Writers Guild of America stepped in and gave sole writing credit to Zach Penn anyway.
Yeah, that was a huge point of contention.
They argued the core structure and plot hadn't fundamentally changed, despite all of Norton's dialogue polishes.
What's fascinating here is how this tug of war over the script perfectly highlights the central tension of modern Hollywood.
How so?
Well, you have a studio wanting a crowd-pleasing, fast-paced, action-packed, foundational film to launch a cinematic universe. On the other side, you have a lead actor wanting a nuanced, cerebral, tragic character study.
Right.
Those two visions are fundamentally at odds, and that friction started on the page long before cameras ever rolled.
And that friction bled right into the grueling physical production of the film, which, ironically enough, ended up being green in more ways than one.
Yeah.
Let's look at the physical shoot, because it sounds like an absolute nightmare.
It was an incredibly demanding schedule. The director, Louis Leterrier, actually broke his foot early in the production.
Oh, man.
Yeah, and instead of shutting down or slowing the schedule, which, costs hundreds of thousands of dollars a day, he ended up directing 4 separate camera units simultaneously while hobbling around on a cast.
That is insane.
They were just determined to ground the film in real tactile environments rather than just shooting everything safely on a soundstage against a green screen.
And the locations were all over the map. I mean, they went from the steep, cramped favelas in Rio de Janeiro to a literal freezing glacier in Bella Coola, British Columbia, all the way to Toronto.
Yeah, the Toronto shoot was huge.
The Toronto shoot completely blows my mind. The mayor at the time, David Miller, was apparently a huge Hulk fan. So he let the production close down Yonge Street, which is a massive central artery in the city, for 4 nights.
4 whole nights on a main street.
Yeah, and they were overturning burning vehicles, blowing things up, creating absolute havoc. But the catch was, the crew had to completely clean the street and remove the wreckage in 20 minutes every single morning so normal business and traffic could resume.
Which is just wild to think about. That level of practical destruction requires immense logistical coordination. You have hundreds of crew members acting like a military unit just to sweep away shattered glass and flipped cars in 20 minutes.
Right.
But what is even more impressive about that massive physical footprint is how they manage their environmental impact. The production joined a green screen initiative in Toronto and actually became the first blockbuster ever to receive the Environmental Media Association's Green Seal.
See, I am struggling to understand why a massive studio in 2008 cared about that. Like, was this just a PR stunt?
It's a fair question.
Because producing a movie on that scale usually means thousands of plastic water bottles, idling diesel generators pumping black smoke into the air, and dumpsters full of wasted wood.
Well, it was partially PR, definitely, but it also reflected a genuine shift in Hollywood. The industry was really just starting to reckon with its massive carbon footprint, and the mechanics of getting that green seal were rigorous.
What did they actually have to do?
They couldn't just use standard plywood for the sets. They had to source sustainably harvested yellow pine and then meticulously dismantle and recycle or donate the wood afterwards.
Oh, wow.
They used hybrid and fuel-efficient vehicles for the crew. They powered those massive set generators with low-sulfur diesel to cut emissions. They even mandated biodegradable food containers and soap across the entire production.
That's actually really impressive.
It is. The Hulk, a giant green monster, literally became the perfect mascot for a shift towards sustainable film production.
I do have to ask, though, does knowing a movie was incredibly eco-friendly behind the scenes actually change the way you watch it?
How do you mean?
Well, when you're sitting in a theater watching a giant CGI monster, smashing a city block to rubble, throwing cars into buildings, does the real-world environmental responsibility cancel out the fictional destruction? It's a very strange cognitive dissonance for the viewer.
It is a strange contrast for sure, but it really speaks to the dual nature of modern filmmaking. Because while the physical crew on the ground was working meticulously to save the real environment, the post-production crew was locked in dark rooms utilizing cutting-edge technology to completely destroy a digital one.
Yeah, let's talk about the anatomy of that digital destruction, because the visual effects for this movie were a monumental undertaking.
Absolutely massive.
The sources say they had over 700 visual effects shots. And just to give you an idea of the painstaking detail involved, there is one shot early in the film where a single drop of Bruce Banner's gamma-irradiated blood falls through 3 floors of a bottling factory.
Right, the factory scene.
Yeah. That one shot took a visual effects company called Image Engine an entire year to complete.
Wait, walk me through that. How does a single drop of blood take a whole company a year to render?
It all comes down to the physics of fluid dynamics, which are notoriously difficult to replicate in CGI. Think about how a drop of liquid actually moves.
Okay.
As it falls, it changes shape based on air resistance. It elongates, it wobbles. More importantly, it refracts light. The VFX artist had to perfectly match the digital blood drop to the real-world plates.
Real-world plates being the raw physical footage they actually shot on the factory set.
Exactly. They shot the empty factory, noting exactly where the physical lights were hanging. The computer then has to calculate how the ambient light of that real factory would bend and scatter through the microscopic surface of a falling liquid.
That is wild.
And when it finally hits the ground, it doesn't just stop. It splatters based on viscosity and surface tension. Replicating those microphysics so the human eye doesn't detect a fake cartoon took 12 months of rendering and tweaking. That is just staggering.
Enough.
And they applied that same level of obsessive detail to the Hulk himself, too. Like, they didn't want him to look like a cartoon. Leterrier and the visual effects supervisor, Kurt Williams, had a very specific vision for the creature's anatomy.
Yes, very specific.
They intentionally designed him away from the classic bodybuilder look. Instead, they designed him to look like a 9-foot-tall football linebacker.
Right.
0 grams of fat. Just pure, chiseled, functional muscle, like a literal tank.
Yeah.
But to get the movement right, Edward Norton and Tim Roth, who played the villain, Emil Blonsky, also known as the Abomination, they did 2,500 takes of motion capture.
Yeah, and the mechanics of motion capture in 2008 were a huge leap forward.
The sources mentioned they were wearing phosphorescent face paint and standing under strobe lights. How does bouncing a strobe light off face paint actually translate into a digital behemoth?
It is essentially an optical tracking system. The actors have these glowing dots painted on specific muscle groups on their faces and bodies. The strobe lights illuminate those dots, and specialized cameras track the movement of those glowing points in a 3-dimensional space.
Oh, I see.
So the computer takes that data, like the exact way Tim Roth's cheek twitches or how Edward Norton's brow furrows, and it maps it directly onto a digital skeleton. It was a massive evolution from the 2003 film, which relied heavily on traditional animation techniques where artists just drew the movements by hand.
And it wasn't just the technology dictating the design, it was real-world logic, too.
Oh, definitely.
Because for the Abomination, Leterrier made a very deliberate change to the design from the comic books. In the comics, the character has these distinct, pointy, almost reptilian ears.
Right. Very iconic look.
But Leterrier decided to leave those pointy ears off the final movie design.
Right.
Why? Because he realized that if the Abomination had pointy ears sticking out during a brutal, close-quarter street fight, the Hulk would absolutely just bite them off. He specifically cited Mike Tyson biting Evander Holyfield's ear in 1997. It is just hilarious to me that a bizarre, real-world boxing controversy ended up dictating the physical anatomy of a multi-million-dollar CGI superhero villain.
It is pretty funny, but if we connect this to the broader industry, you can see how this entire era of VFX was deeply influenced by what Andy Serkis had just done with Gollum in Lord of the Rings and King Kong.
Oh, totally.
Actors were finally realizing they weren't just stepping into a sound booth to voice a cartoon, they were physically becoming the monsters. The technology was catching up to the point where an actor's specific posture, like Tim Roth choosing to model the Abomination's movements after the predatory glide of a shark, could be directly and accurately translated into a digital creature.
But, capturing those 2,500 takes and building those incredibly complex digital models was exhausting.
Oh, I can only imagine.
And it turns out, figuring out which of those takes to actually put in the final movie sparked a battle that was almost as destructive as the Hulk himself.
Ah, yes, the editing room war. This is where those competing visions we talked about earlier truly collided.
The art versus commerce battle.
Exactly. You have Edward Norton and Louis Leterrier on one side, advocating for a slow burn, thoughtful epic running about 135 minutes. And on the other side, you have the Marvel producers, who wanted a fast-paced, action-heavy movie coming in at under 2 hours to maximize daily showtimes in theaters.
Right. And 70 minutes of footage was cut. 70. To put that in perspective, That is the length of an entire indie film just left on the cutting room floor.
It's a huge amount of material.
Mostly, it dealt with Bruce Banner's tragic backstory and his psychological struggle. Like, for example, the original opening of the movie was this incredibly dark scene where Banner travels to a freezing glacier in the Arctic to commit suicide.
Very dark for a Marvel movie.
Extremely. He pulls a trigger, and the Hulk spits the bullet out. And fun fact, as the camera pulls back in that deleted scene, you can actually briefly see the frozen body of Captain America buried in the ice.
That's a great little Easter egg. But when they showed that longer, darker cut to test audiences, it completely flatlined.
See, why do studios put so much stock in test audiences? Like, if you hire a brilliant actor and a visionary director, why panic when a random group of people in a mall theater give it a low score?
It all comes down to risk mitigation. When a studio is investing $150 million into production, plus another $100 million into global marketing, they aren't looking to make obscure art. They are looking to protect a massive financial investment.
Yeah, that makes sense when you put it that way.
The test audiences found the longer cut too slow and far too reminiscent of the brooding tone from the 2003 film, which is exactly what Marvel had promised to avoid. So the producers mandated that all those deep character-building flashbacks be stripped out of the narrative and condensed into a quick 3-minute montage during the opening credits.
Basically, get the backstory out of the way and get to the smashing.
Pretty much.
Imagine being the editor on this film. Like, you are physically caught in a small, dark room in the middle of a screaming match between an A-list star who feels his artistic soul is being compromised and powerful studio executives who are just pointing at test scores and box office projections.
Not an enviable position.
It really makes you wonder, at this blockbuster level, how much of the art of cinema is actually just the art of corporate compromise?
That might be the defining question of the modern blockbuster era, honestly. This clash is a classic Hollywood archetype. It's the collision of an actor's intense personal investment in the psychology of a character versus a studio's desperate need for a streamlined, easily digestible, highly marketable product.
And when Marvel executives ultimately won that battle and locked the final cut, the dispute became very public.
Very public.
Instead of doing the standard smiling promotional press tour when the movie came out, Edward Norton essentially tapped out. He went to Africa to do charity work.
Yeah, he let the movie speak for itself.
Which is a very polite Hollywood way of saying, I am not going to sit on a talk show couch and pretend I'm thrilled about this heavily compromised final cut.
Exactly.
And that intense clash in the editing room ultimately sealed the character's fate. Because the Bruce Banner we got in this deep dive wouldn't be the Bruce Banner we got in the future.
Precisely. When it came time to cross the character over onto the Avengers in 2012, Marvel made a very public pivot. Edward Norton was out, and Mark Ruffalo was in.
Yeah, Kevin Feige, the head of Marvel Studios, actually put out a statement at the time saying they needed an actor with a, quote, collaborative spirit.
Ouch.
Right. That is some highly crafted, weaponized corporate shade right there.
It really was. It was a definitive drawing of a line in the sand. Marvel was declaring exactly how their cinematic universe was going to operate moving forward. The studio was the auteur, not the actors. But the casting change wasn't the only complication. The Incredible Hulk was a moderate financial success. It grossed about $265 million worldwide, which surpassed the 2003 film.
So it made money.
It did. And by all traditional Hollywood metrics, a movie that makes that much money and establishes a popular character should have gotten a direct solo sequel. But it never did.
And the reason why is just fascinating. It all comes down to a massively complex web of distribution rights. I need you to walk me through this because I know Marvel produced the film, but Universal Pictures held the distribution rights.
Yeah, it's tricky.
What does that actually mean mechanically in Hollywood?
It is a crucial distinction. Production means making the film. Marvel paid for the actors, the sets, the visual effects. They own the creative copyright.
Okay, so what does distribution mean?
Distribution means putting the film in front of audiences.
Yeah.
Universal paid for the marketing, negotiated the deals with theater chains around the world, and physically shipped the digital drives to cinemas.
Got it.
In exchange for doing that, a distributor takes a massive percentage of the box office gross right off the top. Furthermore, Universal held the right of first refusal to distribute any future solo Hulk films.
So if Marvel wanted to make Hulk 2, they legally had to offer the distribution rights to Universal first.
Correct. But shortly after this movie came out, the Walt Disney Company acquired Marvel.
Ah, right.
And Disney has its own massive global distribution arm. They certainly didn't want to fund a $200 million movie only to hand 15% of the global box office profits over to Universal, which is owned by Comcast, a direct corporate rival.
So how did they get around it? Did they just buy the rights back?
No, they actually found a legal loophole in the contract. The right of first refusal specifically applied to solo Hulk films.
Oh, wow.
Right. If the Hulk was just the supporting character in another heroes movie, Disney could distribute it themselves and keep all the money.
Which explains everything. It means Marvel had to use the Hulk exclusively as a supporting character. He became this perennial sidekick, showing up in Avengers ensemble movies or buddy-copping it with Chris Hemsworth and Thor,
Right.
Ragnarok.
Exactly.
They completely reshaped the character's entire narrative trajectory just to avoid dealing with a rival studio.
It really raises an incredibly important point about how we consume media today. We like to think that the stories we see on screen are the result of pure creative inspiration. But intellectual property law, contract loopholes, and corporate distribution rights are actively dictating the plot lines.
That's so true.
The Hulk's entire character arc for the next 15 years, his emotional evolution, his limited screen time, his relationships, was largely defined by a legal technicality drafted by lawyers in a boardroom long before cameras ever rolled.
It is wild to think about the butterfly effect of all of this. To recap the incredible journey of this film, we started with a production that was genuinely trying to change the real world with eco-friendly sets and groundbreaking optical motion capture technology.
Right.
Then it devolved into intense behind-the-scenes creative brawls over the artistic soul of the character. And finally, it ended with legal technicalities that turned a leading man into a franchise sidekick.
It serves as a perfect time capsule. It shows you the exact moment when the old Hollywood model, where a difficult auteur actor could bend a massive production to his will, collided head-on with the new Hollywood model of the producer-driven mega franchise.
And the franchise won.
The franchise definitely won.
So the next time you sit down in a theater and watch a massive blockbuster with all the seamless CGI explosions and interconnected universe building, just remember, the drama happening behind the camera is often more intense, more complicated, and far more impactful than the explosions on screen.
The real story is always hiding in the fine print.
Absolutely. Before we go, I want to leave you with a thought to ponder. At the very end of The Incredible Hulk, there's a famous cameo.
Oh yeah, Tony Stark.
Right. Tony Stark approaches General Ross in a dimly lit bar and tells him they're putting a team together. It was the promise of the Avengers. But imagine for a second if the behind-the-scenes drama hadn't happened. If Edward Norton had stayed, and Universal had easily given up the distribution rights.
That's a big what if.
How would the entire landscape of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the very concept of the modern cinematic universe itself have evolved differently? Would a moody, fiercely independent, Norton-led Hulk franchise have grounded the entire universe in gritty psychological realism?
Or
Or would his constant need for creative control have shattered that cohesive, collaborative spirit that eventually made the Avengers a billion-dollar success? We will never know. But looking back at the summer of 2008, it's clear that this awkward middle child had to stumble so that a cinematic empire could run.
a fascinating what if to end on.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. See you next time.